more like Rey Dau, am I right? Why is nobody laughing? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, arch-tempered Rey Dau has come to the game fast and hard, and he's pretty fast and hard, and I'm getting vastly, no, why would I say those words? He's here, he's awesome, and he has a new gamma version of his original armor set, and I bet you want to know just how good it is. What's different from the normal set, and how does it compare to what people are using as the more meta offensive options? The short answer is it's fantastic, and if you like the look of it, absolutely give it a go, though maybe not so much so if you are dual blades or bow, or if you want to do more of a shelling focused gunlance. The long answer is the rest of this video. First up, what has changed from the regular Rey Dau armor? Well, the set bonus is the same, there is no difference there. It extends Latent Power's uptime from 2 minutes up to 2.5 minutes for the 2 set, and up to 3.5 minutes of length for the 4 set. A couple of days ago, we talked quite a bit in depth about the Latent Power skill, which relates very directly to this set bonus. I did a lot of testing with the skill, so I'll be using the numbers established in that video, and if you want to see the proof of the hero on that one, just go ahead and check that video out too. Aside from that, a big new thing is the group bonus on this armor set, which is Lord Soul, Guts, Tenacity, and this is different for Gamma Rey Dau as opposed to the regular Rey Dau, and it is honestly extremely intriguing. What this does, or at least what it says it does, is give you bonus attack, lowered defense, but letting you survive 1 lethal hit. Afterwards, it will boost your defense and resistance. That, however, is incredibly vague, so what does it mean? From the start of the quest until you trigger this Guts effect, which is the effect that prevents an otherwise lethal damage hit, you will have approximately 5% increased raw attack compared to not having the group bonus. As a payment for that, you will also have 5% reduced defense. This doesn't necessarily mean 5% increased damage taken by any means, as damage reduction from defense is a curve rather than a straight line, but for most players, 5% defense isn't going to make or break a hunt really, it's rarely ever going to stop you from carding. So the negative is definitely manageable. That said, the 5% attack bonus applies as most percentage attack bonuses do, which is to say that they count the weapon's attack itself. They do not apply to any bonuses you get from other sources, so if you use an Artian weapon with 4 attack reinforcements, 225 attack on the weapon, that would mean that this is the equivalent of being a bonus 11.25 raw. The rest of it works like the Moxie meal skill, at least the low version, or like Guts has functioned in previous Monster Hunter games, which is that it prevents you from fainting when you would take lethal damage, provided that you are at least 35% of your maximum health when the hit connects. If you are above that threshold, then you will survive at exactly 1 health, so you need to heal immediately to stay alive afterwards, but this will keep you from carting. This is pretty significant in itself, of course, just a free cart avoidance. Once you trigger the effect, it cannot happen again, and you will lose your attack buff and your defense debuff, which will then be replaced with a 5% boost to your defense and +3 to all elemental resistances. One fun thing that I found while testing this that I didn't expect, honestly, is that this effect and the way that it tracks these things is based on your death, not quest. Once you have triggered the Guts effect, it will not be able to happen again until either the quest ends or if you die. When you die, it resets this bonus to the neutral stage, which is where it's giving you the attack buff once again, the defense debuff, and you can get a survival for another lethal hit, resetting the cycle. So essentially, if you trigger the Guts effect, you're then in defensive mode until you die, at which point you get reset into offensive mode. That said, if you never trigger the Guts effect, if you never take lethal damage, which is how we're going to judge it generally, as the assumption is that the people looking for meta offensive sets aren't expecting to take lethal damage at any point, so from here on out we're going to be treating it as a 5% attack boost in our comparisons, but the other intricacies are worth being aware of anyways, which is why I went through them there. Aside from that, the Gamma Rey Dau set just has more efficient pieces than the regular set, including having an equal defense number with Zoshia armor, which means tied highest defense on the armor set that we currently have. Generally speaking, the biggest deal singular armor piece from the set is the helmet itself. This gives you a rank of weakness exploit, which is great, a rank of maximum might, which is great, then it has a 3 slot, which is lovely, and then it just has a rank of stamina surge as an entire bonus on the piece, which even if you aren't a weapon that really uses an excessive amount of stamina, mana still makes it easier to keep high uptime on maximum might. This singular armor piece is so good that even if you refuse to stop using gore magala 4-set bonus builds, the new ideal piece for most people to be the 5th armor piece in that set would be the Rey Dau helmet. This doesn't apply to literally all weapon types, but any of the ones that would be building maximum might and weakness exploit anyways will want this pretty much no matter what. The waist is also quite decent, being 2 latent power, 2 maximum might, but no slots on it, and the rest of the armor pieces are just sort of okay really, honestly, but are they decent enough to be worth activating the group and set bonus by equipping them? Honestly, yeah, pretty much just yes straight up. If you're going to be using 2 of these pieces, you definitely want to use 3 of these pieces, and it gets pretty juicy once we get into the proper math of it. The next step then is to talk about latent power as a skill in a little bit more detail. The skill gives you affinity and stamina use reduction when active. You activate it by either spending 2 minutes in the vicinity of a large monster or taking around 133 damage. These sources do not stack with each other, so taking damage won't make it trigger faster through raw time. You need to fully complete either one of the 2 activation conditions independently of each other. Once activated, the buff then lasts for 2 minutes by default, 2.5 minutes when using Rey Dau 2-set bonus, and a full 3.5 minutes when using the Rey Dau 4-set bonus. Using this, we can work out average uptime for the skill, and this would put it at 50% uptime, 55% uptime with the 2-set, and 60% average uptime with the 4-set bonus, meaning it will be active for that portion of your hunt on average over a longer period of time. But that also comes with a few caveats. First, the good one, the one that works in favor of the skill, which is that if you trigger it by taking damage instead of by time, you can activate it faster than 2 minutes, and the uptime will go up dramatically compared to what I just went over. The skill will get way better as a result. So the more damage you take, the better this skill is flat out. I would say an average player doing tempered quests, especially rank 7 and 8 quests, will trigger this from the damage taken activation condition before they do from time, a good actual percentage of the time, because that is like 2 or 3 hits from arch-tempered Rey Dau for reference as a bit of a point to go by. This goes doubly for weapons that have hyper armor baked into them and are forced to have chip damage as part of their regular combat. Things like greatsword and switch axe will take damage from the monster without actually doing anything wrong, without making any mistakes, and so you can trigger this skill way quicker and more effectively than other weapons can. And similar for weapons that guard attacks as well, except, you know, that you probably want to be perfect guarding instead of just regular guarding, and as perfect guard is the goal of guard weapons, I would say with guard weapons are something like bow or dual blades with extremely strong evade moves in their moveset, they will usually trigger this effect through time rather than through damage taken. For the weapons that have hyper armor attacks baked into them, you will almost always trigger it through damage taken, and from Josh's testing it with greatsword, he was finding an average activation time of nearly 45 seconds when playing relatively normally against arch-tempered Rey Dau. He is granted one of, if not the hardest hitting monster in the game right now, so he is a specific exception that will make this activate easier, but that is worth knowing. The other main caveats are that latent power is inconsistent affinity. This means that it's awkward to build around, because critical boost is an important weapon skill, which is also a skill that is great when you have high affinity, and very, very not great when you have low affinity. So a build that goes back and forth between low affinity and high affinity is awkward to plan for. Inconsistency is awkward. We generally use averages to try and make up for this, but essentially the less consistent your affinity sources, the more variance you will have in damage output from hunt to hunt based purely on your critical hit RNG. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but something that you should be aware of as we're discussing it. Then next problem here, and honestly the main one with it, is that it is built around super long timers. Wilds is a game full of very, very short hunts, very small health numbers compared to the damage that we could do, and the efficiency that we can do it with compared to previous Monster Hunter games. The faster you are at hunting a monster, the worse latent power is, and the main reason for this is awkward hunt time ending. Having 4-set Rey Dau bonus is great, it makes latent power last for 3.5 minutes once it's activated, but let's say that you do a quest where you don't trigger latent power through damage taken, and where the quest timer itself is anything less than 5.5 minutes. In that situation, you will not get the full value out of the skill or the set bonus, which means it just is worse than we've talked about so far. And the thing is, a lot of hunts while using meta sets done by good hunters are below 5 minutes in this game, excluding just a few monsters closer to the top of the sort of tempered roster, and that would basically mean that you had 3 minutes of latent power uptime instead of the 3.5 that the set bonus is supposed to be, so it muddies the numbers and calculations quite a bit. As well, there are other considerations, like if a monster changes zones during your active buff period of latent power, that is a loss of uptime as well. That said, the monsters closer to the top of the roster in difficulty also of course do more damage, which means they are more likely to trigger the skill before the 2-minute timer by dealing damage to you. Overall, this is a lot of things to think about with this skill, but it boils down to the more that you get hit by the monster, the better the skill is. The longer your quests are, the more consistent the skill is, and if you're a speedrunner, you probably just absolutely hate the skill, you wouldn't get much use out of it at all, and you wouldn't want to use it outside of like heroics synergy specifically, but it scales and gains value inversely with your skill at Monster Hunter. The worse you play, the better this is. I'll be using what I consider to be an average expectation of an experienced veteran hunter. I won't count any weapon as expecting to activate faster than 65 seconds on average, despite it being very possible to activate much quicker than that if you get hit a lot. But I'll also talk about how things look at various levels of uptime to give you just sort of a bigger picture on how much that matters. But now you know what you need to know about this skill for the rest of this to sort of make sense in the rest of this conversation. Moving on, now we get to talk about proper armor sets. Generally speaking, the best sets using Rey Dau Gamma armor will take advantage of the latent power that you're going to be forced into having when you use armor pieces from the set, but not necessarily building more latent power on top of it. As well, it's synergized with the set bonus, and it is a reasonably good skill. You can get more overall value in most situations by actually only using 2 latent power with this set. To be a bit more specific, the best sets that I mathed out for 2-set and 4-set Rey Dau Gamma armor are Rey Dau Gamma helm, arms, waist, mixed with gore magala pieces in the other 2 slots, and this lets you get Rey 2-set, this lets you get the guts and 5% attack group bonus, which is extremely high value, and you get the gore magala 2-set bonus as well. This setup hits unbelievably high affinity levels extremely easily. It will overcap on affinity at some points, you will go above 100%, but it sits right around 95% affinity on average if we count latent power as 50% uptime. Or you can count it at 99% affinity if we count latent power at 70% uptime. This set has the 2-set bonus, which means even if you only activate with the raw timer itself, it will activate every 2 minutes and it lasts for 2.5 minutes, which means it will have 55.5% uptime purely working on the timer, so calling it 50% is even giving it a little leeway for quests that end early, quests where the monster changes zones at a bad time, things like that. 70% is more of a marker for the weapons that have hyper armor attacks or for people who trigger it through raw damage taken, as this counts as activating after 65 seconds of the quest on average. But as this set only has 2 latent power, that is a difference of literally 4% affinity on average, so it is a very small difference overall. As well, since we are using latent power anyways, most people should also use Counter-Strike as a skill with this set, as they both synergize with taking damage, and I fully believe the average hunter activates Counter-Strike often enough to be relevant despite being hit by attacks normally, even outside of things like activating it with offset attacks. That said, the math will be a bit different for each weapon type specifically for their own version of this best set, but I'm using Sword and Shield as a nice, more general example to make a few math comparisons here. You can see the full set that I'm using here. I've gone with 3 offensive guard, 3 critical boost as my actual weapon skills, and then sharpness management in the 3rd slot. Without going through the full math of the set, as this isn't a build video, you don't really care about seeing how we get there, you just want to see the results. When Counter-Strike is active, this hits 529.1 effective raw when accounting for 50% latent power uptime. Or it goes up to 534 effective raw when accounting for 70% latent power uptime. This is a bit less than a 1% difference in overall damage at the end of the day, so for the sake of using less numbers in the rest of this video, for the rest of this I'm going to count it as 50% latent power uptime in general, and you can just know if you are someone who would activate it through taking damage instead of through the timer, you will have up to 1% higher effective raw than what I'm talking about relatively speaking. That said, the meta sword and shield set that I made when Title Update 1 released to begin with, when Counter-Strike was active, was 510.6 effective raw when counting all things similarly, which means this Rey Dau Gamma 3 set, Gore Magala 2 set split is right around a 3.6% damage increase over my old meta set. That said, the old set does change to using Rey Dau Gamma helmet now as well, but the actual offense doesn't change at all. It just gains you some extra defense, a rank of stamina surge, and moves a bit of the slots around a bit. That said, the final set to talk about quickly is the Rey Dau Gamma 4 set, which uses 4 pieces of Rey Dau Gamma armor with the Shia chest piece. Again, this won't be the same for every weapon, sure, but I'm using relatively generalized sets to try and give you an idea of how this compares for the most part. In this case, this set hits 521 effective raw, and that counts latent power uptime at 70% due to the 4 set bonus over 2 set bonus as well. But it still puts it below the mix set with 3 Gamma Rey Dau, 2 Gore Magala, which is the best version of all of these things that I've gone over here. That said, again, this is math, and while math is useful, real hunts in the actual game will produce some slightly more varied results based on a bunch of different factors, and that's why we talked about those factors earlier in the video. Based on all of this information, especially with the knowledge of hunt times and wilds being relatively short, which can cause some awkwardness, I would sit a bit more on the cautious side and say on most hunts, this will be essentially perfectly equal to the old meta sets for anyone who is not a speedrunner if you run it as 3 Rey Dau pieces and 2 Gore Magala pieces. But anytime that a hunt goes longer than you might expect it to, or if you get hit more often than expected and latent power activates earlier as a result of that, it just gets better and better and better relative to the other options, relative to the old best sets. It has no real relevance to things like bow or dual blade users for the most part, as it has forced maximum might, which those weapons don't really like for obvious reasons, and latent power is sort of an anti-synergy with things like discerning dodge for bow, as you have a very, very easy way to avoid taking most if not all damage. So it doesn't really quite apply the same for those weapons, and there are other considerations for different weapon types too, of course, but those are the most glaring ones that don't work quite as well. That said, as an exploration of the skills and the armor in general, they are strong enough to be part of meta sets. Whether it is part of literally the best set or not is a little bit subjective and a little bit varied. It is dependent based on how the hunt goes. More than anything, is dependent on your skill as a hunter, how you do dodging, and it can literally change from quest to quest. But on average, it should start to outperform in any hunt that lasts longer than around 5 minutes. So I would think of it that way. Use it in builds that you want to use for harder monsters, but you wouldn't necessarily want to bring it to like a Chadacabra in low rank or even anything that isn't tempered, honestly. You wouldn't hunt a rabbit with a cannon, so this build archetype is fine to be something that is specifically better for tougher fights, the longer fights, the monsters that do more damage and are harder to dodge perfectly. That just about does it for today then, everyone. This is a very complex set of skills, and there is a lot of potential variance from hunt to hunt involved in deciding the value of the Rey Dau Gamma set, but I hope I've done a good job of explaining the process that I took, the logic that I'm using, and hopefully I've explained these situations in which the best sets in the game will be actively using at least 3 pieces of Rey Dau Gamma armor. As well, it isn't going to be the literal best for every single hunt that you do. This is an extremely relevant armor set being added to the game that absolutely shakes up the established meta. I hope you've all enjoyed the video then, and hopefully it helps you get even more fun out of arch-tempered Rey Dau and what he can give you. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.